Hey, yeah, what's up? This disciple Marshall Occurrence reign back up in this anti-Illuminati all day, anti-America all day. So this message is going to be about are the people that passed the 44 states with child marriage laws, are they adults? Now, when I say adults, obviously they are over the ages of 18. I'm asking, are they have they arrived in manhood or womanhood? Have they arrived in any form of manhood and womanhood? Now, no one has perfected manhood. No one has perfected womanhood. There is no perfect man or perfect woman. That's not what I'm asking here. I'm asking, do they have the level of maturity and thought process of men and women that are fully mature? Because I don't know any fully grown man that that goes. I don't know any fully grown man that will go into the government and pass laws to marry children. I can't imagine a masculine real man doing this. Can you? Can you imagine a brawny man? Well, most of these politicians are not brawny, so but let's cover him anyway. Can you imagine a brawny man doing that? Can you imagine a brawny man passing 44 states or a child marriage law in a state? Can you imagine a brawny, masculine, real man doing that? Can't imagine it, can you? Can you imagine any real man that has raised any children or has any children of his own sitting down to sign off on paperwork that allows a state to marry children? Can you imagine this? Can you imagine any man that you know, that you esteem as a man or a man's man? Can you see him sitting down and signing off on paperwork for child marriage? Can you imagine a man's man? A man's man. A man that everyone agrees, this is a man. Yeah, this is a man. Can you imagine a man's man that pretty much is accepted by most men's standard as a man? Can you imagine that man, a man's man, passing child marriage laws? Yes or no question? Yes or no question? The odds are is no real man would ever pass laws to marry children. Nobody that I esteem as a man, I believe, would do that. Not my fathers, my father, my stepfather. I know they would not pass child marriage laws to marry children. Me, having brought a son into the world myself, my son is 15. I would not pass any child marriage laws. So again, can you imagine a real man passing, a real adult, fully matured, passing child marriage law in any form or fashion? I'm talking about the politicians that pass these laws. Can you imagine any fully mature adult passing a child marriage law? Can you imagine this? Can you imagine any real woman? Because I think that with at least with 44 states with child marriage, out of 44 states, there had to be a woman, a female in the mix. It had to be. It couldn't be all men with 44 states with child marriage. There had to be some female politician somewhere in there that got this done. But we know it was at least 44 people that got this done in this country. And I suspect that it wasn't all men. It's safe to say some women either helped pass these laws or they observed as politicians themselves these laws being passed. So they either seen it or they were part of the process. They knew about it, they heard about it, they seen it, or they were actually part of the process. Now ask yourself, a mother, a woman who is born to be a mother. That's not sexist when I say that. Born to be a caretaker, born to be a nurturer, born to be a guardian in our community. Can you see a caretaker, a nurturer of our community, a mother literally of our community? Can you see her standing back and allowing child marriage to go through? A real woman, which is a nurturer, a mother, a real woman usually becomes a mother and therefore becomes a nurturer, a caretaker. Can you imagine a woman, a caretaker, sitting back and watching child marriage laws get passed? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine this? I'm talking about real men that you esteem as real men, and women that you esteem as real women. Can you imagine people that you esteem as real men and women sitting down and passing laws, knowing well what they're doing, not deceived about what they're doing, well aware of what they're doing, passing child marriage laws? Can you imagine that? Now, the next question is, do you esteem these people that pass these child marriage laws as real men and women? Yes or no? Do you esteem them as real men and women? It's a yes or no question. I'm asking you, do you esteem them as real men and women? Yes or no? I asked you first, could you imagine a real man and woman doing it? And I'm pretty sure your answer is no. You couldn't imagine a brawny man sitting down, a masculine, brawny, muscular man sitting down, passing child marriage laws. You couldn't imagine that, could you? Think about the most masculine, muscular man that you know. Now, could you imagine him sitting down writing, passing child marriage laws? Think about the most nurturing, motherly woman that you know. Could you imagine her sitting down passing child marriage laws? So we covered, you could not imagine this, right? The next question is, do you esteem the actual people that pass these laws as men and women? You see all the dynamics I'm covering? You see how progressive this issue is? Why you think I'm still talking about the same thing? I'm asking many different questions concerning this issue. You esteem them as real men and women. You esteem them as real men and women that live and think according to real men and women, right? I'm not talking about perfection. I'm talking about just blooming into maturity. People that are fully bloomed into adult maturity. Have you esteem them as fully bloomed and mature adults? By the way, these are not young adults. So you can't use that excuse. You can't say, well, they were young politicians in their 20s. You can't say that. I'm pretty sure these politicians that passed these child marriage laws were not in their 20s. I'm pretty sure these people, these politicians that passed these child marriage laws, these male and females that passed these child marriage laws, were not in their 30s. Pretty sure they were not in their 30s. So these politicians that passed these laws for children to be married, right? They were not in their 20s. They were not in their 30s. So you can't use, well, they were young and dumb, not aware of the world as it is, not aware of the morals that men and women hold, not fully mature to the point where they have morals as men and women do. That can't be the excuse when these politicians were above the age of 20 years old and 30 years old. They were above these ages. So it's not an age issue. It's not an age issue. You can't say they was just too immature to see what is the necessary, uh, what is necessary in this situation. What is unnecessary. You can't say it's a matter of a lack of development as a human being. It wasn't a lack of development. So, what is it? We can't say that they're men and women passing child marriage laws. We can't say this. We can't we also can't say that it was because they were young and maturity. They lacked maturity to make fully grown men and women decisions. like people do in real life in their 20s and 30s. No, we can't say that. They were fully grown, fully aware of the world, having experience under their belt. And I would suspect out of 44 states of with child marriage laws, these laws were passed by parents. So all these men and women to pass these laws had no children. None of these individuals that passed these laws, none of them have any children. And they're past their 20s and their 30s. And laws were passed in 44 states. And out of these 44 states where people are well past 20 and 30 years of age, they're past their 20s and they're past their 30s. And there's 44 states involved in it, collectively speaking. Out of 44 states with people that are over their 20s and 30s, you don't think any of them had children that passed child marriage laws? Of course, some of them had to have children. Let's just look at it for what it is. These are people that are politicians, lawmakers. That's a level of success. I'm pretty sure they have a mate at that level of success. I'm pretty sure they wasn't, this is no disrespect, I'm pretty sure they wasn't catching buses to pass these laws. They had cars. They probably had a house. I'm pretty sure they didn't have an apartment. Like most of us, like many of us do. I'm pretty sure they didn't have an apartment. They didn't have to catch buses. No disrespect to anyone that has to catch buses. I still have to catch buses myself. I'm pretty sure they didn't have to do that. So I say all that to say I'm pretty sure they with a nice place to stay, probably a nice car, whether male or female, these politicians probably were considered a pretty decent catch to most of the surrounding people or their peers or their counterparts, right? So they probably were married or in a relationship and produced some kids. Okay. And through all of that they did, through all of that, having children, having a mate. I mean, again, this is people that are in their 40s, early 40s, maybe mid 40s, something like that. But it's safe to say, whatever age they were, the various ages they were, out of 44 states of politicians passing child marriage laws, some of them had children. We can agree on that, whether they were married or not, even catching the bus or not, whether they had a house or an apartment. We can all agree out of 44 states of politicians passing child marriage laws, those politicians passing those child marriage laws, out of 44 of them, at a minimum, which it was probably more, it's obviously more than that, but a minimum of is 44 politicians. Out of 44 politicians, you telling me one of them didn't have no children? You telling me none of them didn't have no babies? And how old you think the babies was? Young? They probably had young children. Well, okay, they wasn't fairly old. They probably was between the politicians that passed these laws probably were between the ages of, I would say, early 40s to late 50s. Let's just say that. They wasn't 60s and 60 and 70. I'm pretty sure they wasn't. Let's just say, at best, the politicians were between the ages that passed child marriage laws in 44 states. They were between the ages of early 40s to late 60s. Let's do that. Which means, on the average, their children probably were 20 years younger than them. Which means, or younger. Their children were either in their 20s or younger, which are young people. And in the midst of having children that are in their 20s or younger, I'm pretty sure they had kids younger than that. They probably had kids in grade school. And in the midst of having children in grade school or in their early 20s, because we can agree that some out of 44 politicians, that's the minimum number that passed these child marriage laws in 44 states, that some of them had children, and those children were in their early 20s or younger, and they still went about to some government facility and passed child marriage laws when they have children themselves. Now, when you look at the wiring of this, you see how it's more sophisticated than you thought, than you first believed. You see how sophisticated this whole situation is? That's why I couldn't do one video and do it in one day. It wouldn't have worked. I wouldn't have had enough time in a day to cover all these different dynamics that I've been covering. Now you see how cold that is. You see how dark that is. That these people, 44 states, had to have children. Some of them had to. I would say at least a quarter of them had children. Out of 44 politicians or better, 44 plus politicians, at least a quarter of them had children. So what's that? Already like what, 10, 15 of them? Between 10 and 15 of them? Between 10 or 15 of those politicians, definitely they had children. Out of 44 politicians, a quarter of that, that's about between 10 and 15. You know, maybe between I'll say 8 and 12. 8 and 12 politicians out of that group, they had to have children themselves. And even through their own life of being a parent, seeing their child born in the hospital, playing with their children, I'm pretty sure their children wasn't infants, so they interacted with their children to a certain degree, fed their children bottles. Let's go through the whole process. We got to go through their whole life. They fed their children bottles, changed diapers, used baby wipes to clean the children, bathed the children, had little toys for them, all kind of stuff like that. Had a room set up for them with little music in their cribs, watched cartoons with their children, bought out all kind of little clothes and onesies for the children. And they still passed child marriage laws after those experiences. You have to look at this part. And this is why you should ask the American system to resign as a brand when you have people that passed these laws, that had children themselves, watched their children grow, spend time with their children, watch their children take their first steps. They did all of that in their own personal life, and they still passed child marriage laws for your community. The child marriage laws wasn't for them. Now this is what's going to really make you angry. Like I told you, most of these people already had probably a companion. They probably were already in marriage. They had companions, right? So they weren't engaged in child marriage. They didn't pass the laws for themselves, right? So they passed it for you as a community. While they have a family and children. So you think these politicians themselves are in child marriage? You think these politicians themselves are in a child marriage? No, they were not. They're not in a child marriage. These politicians that passed these laws in 44 states with child marriage are not in a child marriage themselves. They're not married to children themselves. You think these politicians that pass these laws are married to children themselves? I mean, what would people think? These are usually the people at the top of their class. These are the people that are well known in their neighborhoods. These are the people that the whole community know. Their surrounding community know of them. So you know they had to do everything politically correct to get that far. So they passed the laws for you to marry children, but meanwhile themselves, they have children and they're married or in a relationship. Now, don't you want to know don't you want to know who they were individually? Don't you want to know? Don't you want to know who they are? They passed the laws for you, but they don't live by them themselves. So it's like they gave you a poison and poison your culture, poison your integrity and character, poison you know your society with child marriage, but yet they themselves have children and a spouse or a companion. So it's not for them, but it's for you. But you still have to wonder, how can a person that has a family, has children, just like I said, sit down and bathe the child, wipe them with baby wipes, feed them bottles, burp them, watch them take their first steps, watch children do all of that, right? They watch children do all of that. Watch children say their first words. You have to wonder how, after all those experiences with babies, how can they go and pass child marriage laws? This is the reality. They had to have had these experiences. We established that at least a quarter of these politicians had children themselves. People that are at the top of their class, successful people that are able to pass laws in your country. You don't think they had a family? You don't think they had children? So they were just bachelors, motherless, women that were not mothers, men that were not fathers. All of them in 44 states with child marriage. None of them were fathers and mothers. They were. Somebody, at least a quarter of them were. I'm being generous. At least half of them were. Considering that in actuality, more than 44 politicians were involved in the process. But at least at a minimum, there were 44 politicians, being that it was 44 states. At least at a minimum. And at least out of 44 politicians, at least half of them had children, which means they experienced all the things we experience as parents. The things I've experienced, like seeing my son born in the hospital, changing my son's diapers, which I've done. They've done this. They've done this. After changing diapers, baby wipes, cleaning their children, feeding their children, watching their children cool and smile and looking into the eyes of their own innocent children. I'm showing you the whole life, the whole experiences that they had, their experiences in life. They had the disgusting motivation to allow you as a community to marry children. People that are not in their 20s and 30s are well aware of what a child is. The beauty, the purity, just cozying up to the children, all of that good stuff. You have to wonder, how cold could a person be to have had an experience of having children themselves and go and pass child marriage laws. Because if you think that none of them politicians that passed those laws had children, I don't see how I don't know what world you live in. There's no way successful, top of their class people which we agree most politicians are. They're not losers. They're not beggars. They're not living at shelters. So how can 44 politicians living in America, pretty well to do, pretty established in life, be single and not be considered a catch among all their counterparts in their community? That being said, it's a no-brainer they had children. At least a quarter of them did, which means that quarter of people went through the whole baby experience that most of us go through. They went through the same experience. They went through that same experience. And yet, through all of that, they passed child marriage laws. These were not people that you would esteem as wayward, rogue, weirdos, strange. By no stretch of imagination, you would probably consider none of these people strange. You would consider them cultured, if anything, well aware of your community, serving your community, knowing the practices of your community, knowing the ideals of your community. These politicians, by the way, it's safe to say are pretty cultured people. Some would say well read. And through all of understanding their American culture as politicians, which is part of their job as a politician, I mean, you have to know the culture that you're passing laws into, right? You have to know these laws, right? I mean, you have to know the culture, right? You have to know the customs and the ideals of the people. You have to know their value system. You have to know the value system of the people that you're passing laws for. It's safe to say that, right? You're just not going to be a politician that's just oblivious to the ideals and the value systems of your community that you're passing laws for. That's part of probably, I'm pretty sure they have to take some classes on those kind of dynamics where they understand the value systems of their culture. They understand the values, the ideals of Americans. They have to take some type of classes because it wouldn't make sense for them to be passing laws for people that they don't know the value system of in the belief system of and the ideals of. So it's safe to say they were pretty cultured. They knew these politicians that passed these child marriage laws and the ones that passed the last laws 3 years ago, July 1st, 2019, these people are well aware of the ideals in the character and integrity of the American culture and people concerning children. And like I established, also having children themselves. So they knew the ideals of your culture, the value systems of your culture, the integrity of your culture. They had to take classes in college for it, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure in college, going into politics, they had to study the values of Americans. They had to study the culture and the present culture of America. They had to know what Americans value and do not value. They also had to know specifically their the integrity or the character or the views of Americans concerning children. And I would also say because they are an umbrella of over all things, politicians are an umbrella over all these things in our society, the dynamics of our society. They're umbrellas over all they're umbrellas over all the dynamics of our society. It's safe to say they know they're well read on the sexuality of this country as well. They're probably educated on what Americans do sexually. They're probably cultured concerning the sexuality of Americans. So they don't. So these politicians that pass these child marriage laws, being that they pass child marriage laws, which obviously includes sexuality, you don't think they had any read ups? They had to read up on sexuality in America. You don't think they studied nothing, absolutely nothing, on the sexuality of Americans? What they're into, what they do, the percentages of what they do and don't do. You don't think they read up on none of that? And yet they're passing child marriage laws which deals with, we can all agree, deals with some level of sexuality. Of course they know about the sexuality of Americans. Listen, they had to understand all the dynamics of who you are as a community. And yet, and yet, and yet, they passed child marriage laws. After understanding you, understanding your values, understanding how your sexuality, understanding your interactions with children, and also having children themselves, they still went ahead with passing child marriage laws. And if you think these were politicians that you can no longer find, the last child marriage laws that were passed in more than initially, I think it was between 12 states, 12 and 20 states. It's now down to 9. But these laws are still active in 9 states. 9 states is a lot of people. Those are big populations. The last Remind you, there's still 44 states with child marriage. And they have what I'm talking about, the July 1st, 2019 law, which allows adults to marry children at any age, which 9 states has that now. They can marry children at any age. Apply the details of that last law to everything I was telling you about these politicians. They have families themselves. They understand your culture. They understand your value system. They understand your interactions with children. And they passed a law that allows adults in America to marry children at any age. No minimum age, it says, which means any age. And it says, oh, with considering some circumstances or something to that degree. But the fact that they have the term no minimum age shows you their perspective. Any age, which means that's pedophilia. Well, if 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 it's any age, then it obviously covers the ages that you would consider pedophilia for an fully grown adult to interact with sexually. It has to cover the age that you personally would consider, yeah, that's the age of if an adult interacts with that age of child, that's a pedophile. Well, any age is part of the law that covers all the ages that you would consider too young for an adult to interact with. This last law, passed July 1st, 2019, that says no minimum age. This law has these politicians had no problem with doing that. They didn't care about that. It is active now. They were aware of, listen, this law was just passed 3 years ago. It's in 9 states, right? You know how many counties it is in one state alone? You know how many counties this law covers in just one state? Let alone 9 states. And you have to ask yourself, these laws were passed less than 3 years ago. Why did all these other states decide to ban it all of a sudden? Well, they passed it in the first place, which means you still should hold the states that banned it liable for passing it in the first place. Or you should hold them as incompetent for passing it in the first place. I figured that it was a switch of power. That's what it was. Democratic or Republican power was switched, and that's why they banned it once they got in office. But whatever the case may be, you know, many states passed these laws, and obviously everyone doesn't agree with it because some of it was banned, but it's still, listen to this part though, it still is 44 states with child marriage in your country. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and none of these politicians that you know, Donald Trump, none of them are addressing this issue, which makes them the same type of people, the same type of politicians that I named. They have the same experiences of these politicians that I addressed that passed these laws in the first place. They have the same experiences of having children themselves. Donald Trump got children. The last child marriage law was passed under his administration. Now, whether he was a part of the process of passing the law, it was still passed under his administration. And he has children that he has watched come into the world. He watched them take their first steps. He watched them grow their first teeth, and he's watched them do everything. So he has an experience with children, being that he has children himself. And yet, under his administration, July 1st, 2019, a law was passed, and he said virtually nothing about it. Joe Biden is sitting as the commander in chief over the country, and he has a child himself. So that means the same thing. He watched the child grow up. He had this experience with the child. He know how precious a child can be. And yet, after having a child himself, he doesn't have a fatherly passion to get rid of 44 states with child marriage and the law that was passed under the Donald Trump administration July 1st, 2019, that allows adults to marry children at any age. That law allows people to marry children at any age, considering some circumstances. But the fact that it has the term no minimum age is despicable. That's the foundational term in the law, concerning the age. That's how it addresses the age of the children being married. No minimum age. That's how it addresses the children being married. The ages of the children being married. And Joe Biden, as much of an opponent he seems to be of Donald Trump, he didn't do anything about the law passed under the Trump administration. Kamala Harris, she has a child herself as well. So we can apply the same thing. She went through seeing the baby, brought into the world, her being a mother herself. Obviously, she birthed the child into the world. She went through all the experiences that parents go through, all the beautiful things, the Christmases, the beautiful times. She also, later on in life, she was a prosecutor, and she prosecuted sexual assault cases. And yet, she has no motherly passion to see that America has 44 states with child marriage. I'm trying to show you how they have their own life with children, which makes it worse. How they can turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to this elephant in the room of 44 states with child marriage. I could see if they had no children themselves, with no experience with children at all themselves. But that is not the case. Obviously not. With the three politicians that I just named: Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. All three of them got children. Maybe maybe I'm cut from a different cloth, but I thought that people that have children themselves, they begin to champion concerning child protection and how we interact with children, and making sure that is integrity and it has character. Maybe I'm cut from a different cloth. How can parents sit up and either watch it happen, coexist in the White House with it going on, or with it being there, or pass laws themselves? How can these politicians be in those positions like that? And this is what I'm telling you. This is what I'm trying to show you. Now I'm going into the whole wiring of the people's lives and their experiences in their personal lives without being offensive and showing you that according to fully grown adults, how can they be men and women that sit back, that you esteem as men and women, that sit back and just pass laws or sit back in the middle of the laws? How can you esteem Joe Biden as a man's man? How can you esteem Donald Trump as a man's man when it happened on his watch, on Donald Trump's watch? How can you now still esteem him, all his supporters? How can you esteem him as a man's man? Well, I'm pretty sure, let's establish something about this law passed under Donald Trump's administration. He received some type of email or memo concerning this law being passed. Can we establish that? More than once, probably. When the process first started, the middle of the process, and the end of the process of the laws passed July 1st, 2019, that allows adults to marry children at any age. He received some type of memo bulletin as the commander-in-chief over the entire country of America. He received something. And how can you esteem him as a man's man, a man, period, sitting back, saying nothing, and as vocal as this man is about everything, and as verbal as he is about everything, how can a man be like that? That's like him. Isn't that a contradiction for him? That's not a contradiction for Donald Trump. Much as he talk about everything, and he harps on it and harps on it and harps on it, we didn't hear him harp on this, did we? Did you hear him harp on a law passed under his administration, July 1st, 2019, that allows adults to marry children at no minimum age? Did you hear him harp on that at all in any of his rallies or any of his briefings, any of his conference messages? Did you hear him talk about it at all? You didn't, did you? But he's talking about everything else, though. But he was talking about everything else, even down to athletes. He was talking about stars and athletes and everything in between. But we don't hear him address the fact that under his administration, a child marriage law was passed July 1st, 2019. Didn't hear nothing about him talk, nothing about that, did we? Didn't hear him say nothing about that, did we? As vocal as this man is, I'm trying to show you. As verbal as he is, as talkative as he is, talking about everything, covering everything, tweeting about everything. He couldn't send out a tweet. Everybody knows he's famous for the tweets. All those tweets he passed, he couldn't just pass out. He couldn't just post a tweet talking about his disagreement with child marriage law, a child marriage law passed July 1st, 2019 under his administration. He couldn't send out a tweet about that? You telling me he couldn't send out a tweet about that? That's what you telling me. As much as as much irrelevant stuff that he tweets about, he couldn't talk about something as important in the field, in the career area of his own life, about laws. He couldn't talk about laws when he is the president. He couldn't tweet about a bad law that he had a problem with as the president of America. He couldn't tweet nothing about that, but he can tweet about everything else. Sounds like he's immature, which proves my point, he's not a man. Well, if you was mature as a man, as a father yourself, you can't pass a little tweet on and post a little tweet and it's in the same area of vocation that you're doing as the president. President to laws is like a firefighter to fire. Laws to a president is like a fire to a firefighter, like a criminal to a police. Laws, president, fire, firefighter, criminal, police. You get it? Laws is a part of this man's lane. But yet he can talk about everything else, though. That's what I'm saying. It'd be one thing if he was kind of quiet. You know, Joe Biden is kind of quiet. A little bit. But Donald Trump is not. And this law just so happened to be passed under the Donald Trump administration, him being one of the most vocal and talkative and big mouth presidents that there ever has been in history. And yet he said nothing. But yet, if you check his tweets, even back during July, that's some good homework. Go check Donald Trump's tweets, the month of July 2019. That's a 7. Go check his tweets, July 2019. And see all the stuff, the irrelevant stuff that he talking about as the president. It's irrelevant as the president. All this stuff he talking about. It should be irrelevant information to you. But you take the time out of your busy schedule to talk about irrelevant things. But yet you don't talk about relevant things that happened under your administration. July 1st, 2019, the last child marriage law passed. Talking about everything irrelevant, but not relevant. Or most relevant. Talking about everything irrelevant, but not talking about the thing that's most relevant. I heard him say nothing about it. Now, him addressing it as an issue, maybe he did. I didn't hear nothing about that. I didn't see nothing about that. But the bottom line is, we didn't hear him stir up a stink or nothing about the law that was passed under his administration. That's what I'm talking about. We didn't see him cause a stink about nothing. Concerning this. Yeah. We seen him stir up no stink about this whole situation. Like I said, he had to receive some type of memo, some type of bulletin, some type of email. We know this. So this child marriage law was passed, and they didn't inform him at all. That's what you're trying to get me to believe. You're trying to get me to believe that he was totally uninformed in the White House and left the White House uninformed that under his administration, the last child marriage law was passed. This is officially the last child marriage law passed. This is officially the last one passed, as far as I'm aware of. Just 3 years ago, under his administration, You telling me he ain't know nothing about it at all? So he left the White House not knowing. He left the White House not knowing that a child marriage law was passed under his administration. That's what you're trying to get me to believe? That under his administration, a child marriage law was passed, and he left the White House not knowing anything about it. That's what you're trying to get me to believe. As the commander in chief, not as some other position in the White House. As the commander in chief, you telling me he ain't know nothing about it. He left the White House not knowing anything about the latest child marriage law being passed under his administration. You telling me he left the White House and didn't know nothing about it? That's what you're telling me? And how can you? I'm telling you, it gets worse and worse with this man. It gets worse and worse with this man. It doesn't stop. He had a slow response on COVID. Kamala Harris told you that in the vice presidential debate. That's the first thing that came out of her mouth during the debate with Pence. That was the first thing she addressed. That Donald Trump's administration had a slow response on COVID. That's one thing. Right? That's why you got all this COVID spread all around. He was slow to act. And there was a 46-page done by the sub-house committee, if I'm saying that right. They did a 46-page report investigation on Donald Trump, an investigation that didn't get enough press and attention. They did an investigation, the subcommittee house, right? Something like that. Subcommittee house. I'm sure if you Google subcommittee house investigation on Donald Trump, it will come up, right? They investigated him, a 46-page report. They found out that Donald Trump intentionally had a slow response on COVID for political points, which means you have all these dead people in your country because Donald Trump had a slow response on COVID, proven by investigators for political points. He wanted to come in, he wanted to let it flare up, and then he wanted to come in and fix it so you would sing his praises and reelect him. That's what it was all about. He thought it was going to be the equivalent of the mad cow disease or swine flu, something along those lanes, something like that. He had no idea it was going to be like this. He thought he would let it flare up a little bit, and then he would come in and fix it, and your community would sing his praises. That's what he thought, but it backfired. And that's one of the biggest secrets that you don't know. That's one of the biggest situations. But it's not, everybody is not in the dark about it. They investigated him and brought forth this information. And I think someone was hushed because this investigation is one of the most mysterious investigations. And I'm going to do a video on this too. How come we were not totally and thoroughly as the American community informed of this investigation where Donald Trump was found guilty of having a slow response on COVID for political points? How come we wasn't informed? How come they talk about everything else a million times? Did you hear it a million times? Did you hear anything about it? CNN talks about everything. I'm going to go back and see if they talked about it. I didn't hear anything about it. And I definitely didn't hear about it a million times. You didn't hear about it a million times, did you? Specifically, an investigation with people that are qualified to investigate people. They're qualified, by the way. These ain't no rinky-dink people. These ain't no ragtag people. These people are qualified, schooled and qualified to investigate presidents. Not let alone politicians, president. So you know how many dynamics and all they got to look at? You know how seriously they have to take their job? Or it's their heads that will roll? Or it's their heads that will roll? You know how seriously they have to take their job to investigate the president? They investigated him and found, they made it clear, not fake news, a full, thorough investigation by people that are schooled to do so. People that go to school to do so came to the conclusion with a 46-page report that Donald Trump had an intentional, keyword, intentional, slow response to COVID. See, Kamala Harris in the vice presidential debate, she says he knew about it. She didn't say it was a slow, intentional response. The people that investigated Donald Trump said it was a slow, it was a slow, intentional response. You see the difference? How the information got progressive? Kamala Harris told you that they knew about it and didn't tell you, speeding up to the situation through an investigation. The subcommittee told you they found out, they did a 46-page investigation, keywords, meaning they had to be qualified to do this. They found out he had a slow, intentional response to COVID for political points. This is their exact words, word for word. And I've done a video on this already. You can go Google this. Donald Trump slow response, intentional slow response, 46-page report, House subcommittee, whoever that is. I'm pretty sure you know whoever it is, you probably do. I'm going to get the exact term on who that is, and next time I'm going to definitely know. But it's subcommittee, something like that. But this is factual. This is definitely factual. This is not conspiracy theory. He had an intentional slow response to COVID for political points. It was proven by people that investigate presidents, that are schooled to do so, that go to college to do so, and they found out that he intentionally did that to your community. And if that wasn't bad enough, with all the blood he got on his hands, under his administration, the last child marriage law was passed. If that wasn't bad enough, I know I'm on to something. I'm on to something. When I'm telling you they actually investigated him, and you didn't even know about this investigation. Did you hear about this investigation? Did you know anything? It's too much stuff going on that you don't know about. Now we find out, obviously, that he did something to the election. He tampered with that. You didn't know about that. This is real stuff, folks. And you didn't know about this investigation, now did you? The House subcommittee, you didn't know nothing about that, did you? The House subcommittee investigated Donald Trump, obviously being qualified to do so. They're obviously qualified to do so, not being halfway there, kind of qualified, all the way qualified, and their results are not halfway right. They're qualified, so the results are right. They wouldn't say a statement like that if they barely could prove it. These people probably were over the top with proving this. They probably had information that was bubbling over well more than enough to prove that Donald Trump had an intentional slow response to COVID-19 for political points. He intentionally backed off of it and let it get out of control so that he could fix it and you would sing his praises and re-elect him. That's why your country now is simmering in evil, because evil has been done to you. Hey, listen, someone else investigated him and concluded this information. I'm not the only one on this. Obviously not. When I tell you the House subcommittee investigated Donald Trump, qualified people with a 46-page report. Those are the key words you got to Google. Sub-House committee investigates Donald Trump with an intentional slow response to COVID. 46-page report. It was 46 pages. That's a lot of information. And at the end of that information, they concluded Donald Trump had an intentional slow response to COVID, which makes him public enemy number one for America. Well, you're suffering as a result of him. Your country has a million plus deaths, if you want to be technical, in sound of mind concerning this. You have a million plus dead people because Donald Trump had an intentional slow response to COVID-19. That's the sound of mind facts here. That's the sound of mind conclusion here. Right? Because the rest of you stuck in conspiracy theories about why this is here. They just had a 46-page report investigating him, showing you why it's here like it is. Kamala Harris tried to tell you, you didn't listen to her. I'm not going to say because she's a woman of African descent, but you didn't listen. It is hard for Americans to listen to African Americans. It seems like it's hard for you to listen to us. Because I wonder if white American would have told you the same thing the way she said it, that Donald Trump and them knew, the White House knew about this and they didn't tell you. Now, if a white American told you the same thing, I'm just saying, I wonder how your response would be. That's the first thing she said in the vice presidential debate. You don't have to look at the whole debate because it's the first thing she said. You can go right to that part. It's the first thing she said, and you can be done with the rest. You don't got to listen to the rest of it. Do yourself a favor and listen to that. Right? That's what I'm talking about, man. It's facts here. Raw facts. And you telling me I don't deserve respect? And you have to ask yourself, even with him doing that, putting your family in harm's way, it's here like it is because of him. It's here like it is because of specifically him having a slow response to it. What is done in the dark comes to the light. Everyone knows this. What is done in the dark, it has to come to the light. Whatever you try to bury at the bottom of the ocean, it's going to bobble on top of the water, even if it takes years. Just like you throw a glass bottle out with a message in it. That bottle may go through storms, I'm pretty sure it do. It may go through even being in the mouths of whales, anything. It goes through all of the whole oceanography, if you will. It goes through the whole ocean life, and that bottle still finds its way into someone's hands, right? It's the same situation. He tried to, get you to sing his praises by fixing a disease that he didn't know. He didn't know how big it was. He didn't know how big it was going to be. He thought it was going to be, like I said, the biggest as the swine flu. Think about it. You had no way of knowing as Americans what this was going to be. All we all know is that it was election year, which is the equivalent of inspection at a job, and he wanted to do something to make himself look great and overqualified. So he tried to use this virus, utilize it for you to reelect him. It's in his character. Think about it. It fits right in. It fits right into how his spirit is. And you know it, and I know it. And Kamala Harris told you, I don't know if she knows about I'm pretty sure she probably do. She know about the 46-page report done by the House subcommittee. But she definitely tried to warn you about, or inform you about, the slow response that the fact that Donald Trump knew and didn't tell you. That's how she put it. He knew and he didn't tell you. And y'all still talk about him running. You still got people acting like they support him. I'm telling you, you don't realize where we are. You don't realize where we are. But do you consider him a man after doing that? A real man to put your country, you call America, in harm's way like that? That's for all the patriots. Where are all the patriots when you talk about this? Huh? This has been proven. This is not conspiracy theory when I'm telling you he was investigated. Right? That clears this information of being conspiracy theory. When you have people that are trained to investigate people. See, he uses the Jedi mind trick all the time of fake news. He's been getting you with that Jedi mind trick from most of all of his administration. That's his Jedi mind trick. Oh, it's fake news. It's fake news. How is it fake news when you have people that are trained and skilled to investigate people who are overqualified? Pretty sure if they're investigating the president, they're overqualified. So their information is not just barely right. Their information probably is over the top right. And they concluded that he had a slow response concerning COVID for political points. How is that fake news? When it's coming from experienced people that investigated him. He's using it. I'm telling you, I'm going to do a whole video on Jedi mind tricks of the Americans. There's so many Jedi mind tricks that you're not aware of. Child marriage is a Jedi mind trick too. Where there's no such thing of a child getting married. Can we establish that? As Americans, you being American, there's a such thing of child marriage according to your value system? According to your character and ideals, is there a such thing as child marriage? It isn't, is it? So that's a Jedi mind trick to use pedophilia, to dress up pedophilia in a child marriage. With the term child marriage, that's a Jedi mind trick. Ain't no such thing of no child marriage, because a child is not able to be in a relationship with a fully grown adult. They're not able to be in a marriage. So it's no such thing as a child marriage. It is a Jedi mind trick. In other words, it's mind trickery. It's deception. It's a Jedi mind trick. I'm going to do a whole video about, and I'm going to be progressive with it, about Jedi mind tricks of the Americans. I'm gonna go from I'm gonna go from the government. I'm gonna go to the community. I'm gonna go down to the streets. I'm gonna show you all the Jedi mind tricks, different ethnicities, the Jedi mind tricks they use. Everyone's using Jedi mind tricks. That's why if we put the Star Wars world into our community as an analogy, I am not Jedi. The Jedi has failed you. They got child marriage in 44 states. Donald Trump had a slow response to COVID, put you in harm's way. You got COVID more than anybody else, and you still don't know why. And that's why he had a intentional slow response to COVID. And he did that for political points. That's why you have it more than any other country. Qualified people to investigate the president concluded this with a 46-page report. The Jedi has failed you, according to your country. The people that you esteemed as the patriots, the heroes. Yeah, you need to hear it like this. That would be the Jedi, right? Well, is the American government the Sith? I'm just saying, as far as how most citizens think here. So most citizens don't think that the American government and authorities, including police, military, they don't consider that the Sith, do they? They consider that the Jedi, don't they? Okay, so the Jedi failed you. And guess who wind up being right? The one that they esteemed as the enemy. Me. Other people like me. The Vaders. The Darth Vaders. The Sith. We the ones that's right. The Christians, ironically, we are the Sith. We are the dark side because you oppose us as a community. We are the minority. The minority automatically, whoever it is, whether they have good morals or bad morals, the minority in this Star Wars world, if you apply it as an analogy to a community, the minority is the dark side. Doesn't mean we're dark and evil, but we are the opposed force, if you will, by most of the community. But we are the ones that are for the better good. It gets tricky because they've become the enemy. But the Jedi has failed you. Let's make that very clear. When they got 44 states with child marriage, you got Donald Trump. The last child marriage law was passed under his administration. Joe Biden, he's nonchalant about it. Kamala Harris was a prosecutor that prosecuted child sexual assault cases. She's nonchalant about it. Looks like the Jedi failed y'all.